believers must suffer. Walk into any religious institution or spiritual community, and you'll likely encounter the belief that pain, sacrifice, and solemn dedication are the only paths to enlightenment. But what if everything we've been taught about spiritual happiness is wrong? The shocking truth is this: being genuinely happy in your spiritual life isn't just possible, it's actually the point. Yet millions of people struggle with guilt, confusion, and frustration on their spiritual journeys, believing they must choose between joy and genuine spiritual growth. This couldn't be further from the truth. Chapter 1. Breaking down the suffering myth. The origins of spiritual suffering. The idea that spiritual growth requires suffering has deep historical roots. Many traditional religious teachings emphasize sacrifice, self-denial, and the transcendence of worldly pleasures. While these concepts have value in certain contexts, they've been misinterpreted to mean that happiness and joy are somehow spiritually inferior or even dangerous. This misunderstanding has created what we might call spiritual masochism, the belief that if something doesn't hurt, it can't be spiritually beneficial. People force themselves through meditation practices they hate, follow rigid rules that bring them no peace, and suppress their natural joy in the name of spiritual advancement. The real purpose of challenge here is where it gets interesting. Spiritual challenges aren't meant to make you miserable. They're meant to help you discover what true happiness actually is. When a spiritual practice or teaching challenges you, it's not asking you to suffer, it's asking you to let go of fake sources of happiness so you can find real ones. Think of it like cleaning out a cluttered room. The process might be temporarily uncomfortable, but the goal isn't discomfort, it's the joy and peace of having a clean, organized space. Chapter 2. What spiritual happiness actually looks like beyond surface level joy. Spiritual happiness isn't the same as eating ice cream or getting a promotion at work. It's deeper, more stable, and less dependent on external circumstances. But here's the shocking part: it's not less joyful. In fact, true spiritual happiness often involves more laughter, more lightness, and more genuine celebration than conventional happiness. Many people are surprised to discover that advanced spiritual practitioners in various traditions are often characterized by their humor, playfulness, and obvious enjoyment of life. The Dalai Lama's infectious laughter, the joy of Sufi dancers, the celebration in gospel music, these aren't accidents or compromises. They're expressions of deep spiritual truth. The 3 levels of spiritual happiness. Level 1, relief, happiness. This is the happiness you feel when suffering stops. Maybe you've been carrying anger for years, and through spiritual practice, you finally let it go. The relief is profound and real, but it's still defined by the absence of pain rather than the presence of joy. Level 2, connection, happiness. This deeper level comes from feeling genuinely connected to yourself, to others, to nature, or to the divine. It's the happiness of belonging, of being part of something larger than yourself. This joy is more stable than relief happiness because it's based on presence rather than absence. Level 3, being happiness. This is the most profound level, the happiness that comes from simply existing. From the sheer miracle of consciousness itself. It doesn't depend on any particular experience or achievement. It's the joy of being alive, aware, and present. Chapter 3. The guilt trap. Why we resist spiritual joy. Cultural programming against happiness. Many of us have been programmed to believe that happiness is selfish, shallow, or temporary. We've absorbed messages like life is meant to be hard, suffering builds character, and happy people are naive. These beliefs create enormous guilt when we start experiencing genuine joy in our spiritual practice. The guilt is often reinforced by spiritual communities that mistake seriousness for depth. If everyone around you looks solemn and speaks in hushed tones about their spiritual practice, you might feel like your joy and enthusiasm are somehow inappropriate or immature. The fear of spiritual bypassing. And source of guilt comes from the legitimate concern about spiritual bypassing, using spiritual practices to avoid dealing with real problems or difficult emotions. Some people worry that if they're happy in their spiritual life, they must be avoiding something important. Here's the truth. There's a huge difference between running away from difficulty and finding joy in the midst of it. Real spiritual happiness doesn't ignore problems, it gives you the strength and clarity to handle them more effectively. Permission to be happy. First step in embracing spiritual happiness is giving yourself permission to experience it. This might sound simple, but for many people, it's revolutionary. You're allowed to enjoy your spiritual practice. You're allowed to feel joy when you meditate, pray, or engage in other spiritual activities. You're allowed to laugh during spiritual discussions and feel excitement about spiritual growth. Chapter 4. The science behind spiritual happiness. What happens in your brain? Modern neuroscience is revealing fascinating insights about what happens in our brains during positive spiritual experiences. When people engage in spiritual practices that bring them joy, whether it's meditation, prayer, chanting, or dancing, their brains show increased activity in areas associated with well-being, connection, and peace. Studies have found that people who report happiness in their spiritual lives tend to have lower levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, higher levels of serotonin and dopamine, feel-good neurotransmitters, increased activity in the prefrontal cortex associated with wisdom and emotional regulation, stronger connections between different brain regions associated with integration and wholeness. The positive feedback loop here is where it gets really interesting. The happier you are in your spiritual practice, the more effective it becomes. Joy creates openness. Openness allows for deeper experiences. Deeper experiences generate more joy, and the cycle continues. This is the opposite of the no pain, no gain mentality that suggests suffering is necessary for growth. Chapter 5. Common obstacles to spiritual happiness. Obstacle 1. The comparison trap. One of the biggest obstacles to spiritual happiness is comparing your journey to others. You might see someone else's practice and think, they seem so serious and dedicated. Maybe I'm not doing this right because I'm enjoying it too much. The truth is, everyone's spiritual path is unique. What brings one person deep spiritual insight might leave another person cold, and that's perfectly okay. Your job isn't to copy someone else's journey, it's to find what genuinely nourishes your soul. Asterisk. Obstacle 2. The not there yet syndrome. Many people postpone happiness until they reach some imaginary spiritual milestone. They think, once I meditate perfectly, or once I overcome all my negative emotions, or once I understand the deepest teachings, then they'll allow themselves to be happy. This approach misses the point entirely. Spiritual happiness isn't a reward you earn after completing your journey. It's fuel that powers your journey. The joy you experience today, even as a beginner, is just as valid and valuable as the joy experienced by advanced practitioners. Obstacle 3. Fear of attachment. Some spiritual traditions warn against attachment to positive experiences, leading people to fear that enjoying their spiritual practice will somehow trap them or slow their progress. While it's true that clinging to any experience can be problematic, there's a difference between appreciating joy and being attached to it. You can fully experience and appreciate spiritual happiness while remaining open to whatever comes next. In fact, the more genuinely happy you are, the less likely you are to cling desperately to that happiness. Asterisk. Obstacle 4. Past religious trauma. Many people carry wounds from negative religious or spiritual experiences in their past. If you were taught that you were inherently sinful, that God was angry with you, or that spiritual practice should be grim and joyless, it makes sense that you'd have difficulty embracing spiritual happiness now. Healing from spiritual trauma is crucial for experiencing genuine joy in your spiritual life. This often involves developing a new, healthier relationship with spirituality that honors both your need for growth and your right to happiness. Chapter 6. Practical strategies for cultivating spiritual happiness. Strategy 1. Follow your natural inclinations instead of forcing yourself through spiritual practices that feel like drudgery. Start with what naturally appeals to you. If you love being in nature, make that part of your spiritual practice. If you're drawn to music, explore chanting or spiritual songs. If you enjoy movement, try walking meditation or spiritual dance. Asterisk. The key is to begin with joy and then deepen from there, rather than starting with obligation and hoping joy will eventually appear. Strategy 2. Celebrate small victories. Acknowledge and celebrate every positive moment in your spiritual journey, no matter how small. Did you have a moment of peace during meditation? Celebrate it. Did you feel more patient with a difficult person? Acknowledge that growth. Did you feel connected to something greater than yourself while watching a sunset? Honor that experience. These celebrations aren't self-indulgent, they're essential for building momentum and creating positive associations with spiritual practice. Strategy 3. Create joyful rituals. Personal rituals that bring you happiness while deepening your spiritual connection. This might involve lighting candles while you meditate, playing beautiful music during prayer time, creating a beautiful sacred space in your home, keeping a gratitude journal with colorful pens, taking spiritual nature walks in places you love. The goal is to make your spiritual practice something you look forward to rather than something you endure. Strategy 4. Find your spiritual community. Seek out like-minded people who also experience joy in their spiritual lives. This might be a meditation group, a spiritual book club, an online community, or even just one friend who shares your approach to spirituality. Being around others who give themselves permission to be happy in their spiritual practice will reinforce your own permission and help normalize the experience of spiritual joy. Strategy 5. Practice gratitude for your path. Acknowledge how fortunate you are to be on a spiritual path at all. Not everyone has the opportunity, inclination, or ability to explore these deeper questions about life and meaning. Your spiritual journey is a gift. Treat it as one. This doesn't mean being grateful for suffering, but rather being grateful for the capacity to grow, learn, and experience the fullness of human consciousness. Chapter 7. Addressing common concerns. Isn't this just spiritual materialism? Some people worry that focusing on happiness in spiritual life is a form of spiritual materialism, seeking spiritual experiences for selfish reasons. While this is a valid concern, there's an important distinction to make. Spiritual materialism involves treating spiritual experiences like possessions to be collected or achievements to boost your ego. Genuine spiritual happiness, on the other hand, is characterized by humility, gratitude, and a natural desire to share joy with others. What about dealing with difficult emotions? Embracing spiritual happiness doesn't mean avoiding difficult emotions or pretending everything is always wonderful. Instead, it means maintaining an underlying foundation of peace and joy that can hold space for the full range of human experience. When you have a strong foundation of spiritual happiness, you're actually better equipped to deal with challenging emotions because you're not afraid they'll destroy your peace permanently. You know that beneath anger, sadness, or fear, your essential joy remains intact. Won't this make me complacent? Another common concern is that being too happy in your spiritual life will make you lazy or complacent about continued growth. The opposite is actually true. Joy is energizing and motivating. When you're happy in your spiritual practice, you naturally want to deepen it, share it, and explore it further. Complacency comes from boredom or resignation, not from joy. Happy spiritual practitioners tend to be among the most committed and engaged because their practice genuinely nourishes them. Chapter 8. The Ripple Effects of Spiritual Happiness on Relationships. You're genuinely happy in your spiritual life. It affects all your relationships. You become more patient, compassionate, and present with others. You're less reactive and more able to respond from a place of love, rather than fear or hurt. This doesn't mean you become a pushover or ignore legitimate concerns. Instead, you gain the inner stability to address problems from a centered, peaceful place rather than from emotional reactivity. Asterisk. Impact on service and contribution. One of the most beautiful aspects of spiritual happiness is that it naturally overflows into service to others. When your cup is full, you naturally want to share what you have. This service doesn't come from obligation or guilt, but from genuine joy and abundance. People who are happy in their spiritual lives often become powerful forces for positive change in the world because they're operating from fullness rather than emptiness. Impact on physical health. Connection between spiritual happiness and physical health is becoming increasingly clear. People who experience joy in their spiritual lives tend to have stronger immune systems, lower rates of depression and anxiety, better cardiovascular health, improved sleep quality, greater longevity. This isn't surprising when you consider that spiritual happiness reduces stress, increases social connection, and gives people a strong sense of purpose and meaning. Chapter 9. Different Paths. Same destination happiness across traditions. One of the most encouraging discoveries is that genuine spiritual happiness appears in every authentic spiritual tradition, even those that seem to emphasize suffering or renunciation. The key is understanding that each tradition has its own language and methods for describing and cultivating what is essentially the same thing: the deep joy of spiritual awakening. In Christianity, this might be called the joy of the Lord or the peace that passes understanding. In Buddhism, it could be the bliss of nirvana or the happiness of liberation. In Hinduism, it might be described as ananda bliss or the joy of self. In Islam, it could be the happiness of surrender to Allah or the joy of dhikr, remembrance of God. Finding your unique expression. While the destination might be similar across traditions, the path to spiritual happiness is deeply personal. Some people find it through quiet contemplation, others through ecstatic dance. Some discover it in solitude, others in community. Some experience it through study and understanding, others through pure feeling and intuition. The key is to remain open to different approaches while staying true to what genuinely resonates with your heart and soul. Chapter 10. Sustaining spiritual happiness. Building consistency. Any other aspect of well-being, spiritual happiness requires consistent nurturing. This doesn't mean forcing yourself through rigid daily practices, but rather maintaining some regular connection to what feeds your soul. This might involve daily moments of gratitude, regular time in nature, weekly participation in spiritual community, monthly spiritual retreats, or intensive practices, annual periods of deeper spiritual focus. The key is finding a rhythm that supports your happiness without becoming another source of stress or obligation. Navigating challenges. When you've cultivated a foundation of spiritual happiness, life will still present challenges. The goal isn't to maintain constant bliss, but rather to maintain access to your inner joy, even during difficult times. This involves developing what might be called spiritual resilience, the ability to return to your center relatively quickly after being thrown off balance by life's inevitable ups and downs. Continuing to grow. Spiritual happiness isn't a final destination, but rather a way of traveling. As you continue to grow and evolve, your understanding and experience of spiritual joy will deepen and expand. What brought you happiness as a beginning seeker might be different from what brings you happiness as a more experienced practitioner, and that's perfectly natural. The key is to remain curious and open, allowing your spiritual happiness to evolve along with the rest of your spiritual life. Conclusion. Your permission to be happy. Shocking truth about being happy in your spiritual life is that it's not shocking at all. It's natural, healthy, and beneficial for everyone involved. The real shock is how many people have been convinced otherwise. You don't need to earn your spiritual happiness through years of suffering. You don't need to wait until you're advanced enough to experience joy. You don't need to feel guilty about enjoying your spiritual practice. You have permission right now, exactly as you are, to be happy in your spiritual life. This permission isn't a license for spiritual bypassing or avoiding necessary growth. Instead, it's an invitation to discover that joy and growth aren't opposites, they're partners in the dance of spiritual awakening. Your happiness in your spiritual life isn't selfish. It's a gift to everyone around you. When you're genuinely joyful in your spiritual practice, you become a beacon of possibility for others who might be struggling with their own spiritual guilt and confusion. The path to spiritual happiness begins with a simple decision: to trust that joy is not only acceptable, but essential to authentic spiritual life. From there, it's a matter of following what genuinely nourishes your soul, celebrating your progress, and sharing your joy with others who are ready to receive it. The shocking truth is that being happy in your spiritual life isn't just possible, it's your birthright. The question isn't whether